Well, the top story tonight, 4 days before the union budget and less than 90 days before the general elections, Congress President Rahul Gandhi has made a big promise, speaking at a rally in Chhattisgarh to thank farmers after the party's resounding election victory in December. Gandhi has promised a minimum income support for the poor if voted to power, claiming that a new India cannot be built when millions suffer the scourge of poverty. Gandhi said the Congress is committed to eradicating hunger. It's important to note that Gandhi has promised a minimum income guarantee and not a universal basic income. That was an idea first mooted by the former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramaniam in the FY18 Economic Survey, and it argues for a uniform stipend for all citizens and not just the poor. Speaking to cnbc TV 18 just a short while ago, former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram said the Congress is looking to adapt the universal basic income to target only the poor. He played down fiscal concerns, saying the party, if voted to power, will remain committed to the 3% fiscal deficit target. Before we bring you the former Finance Minister, here's Rahul Gandhi making that promise in Chhattisgarh.
हम दो हिंदुस्तान नहीं चाहते हैं, एक हिंदुस्तान होगा और उस हिंदुस्तान में हर गरीब व्यक्ति को मिनिमम इनकम देने का काम कांग्रेस पार्टी की सरकार करेगी। और ये काम आज तक दुनिया की किसी सरकार ने नहीं किया है। ये काम दुनिया में सबसे पहले हिंदुस्तान की 2019 के बाद कांग्रेस वाली सरकार करने जा रही है।
We are adapting the idea of universal basic income to our situation and to our needs. Let's assume that 20% of India are the very poor, the poorest. And we must find a way in which that 20% families are assured an annual income at a minimum level, at a level where they will have enough food, enough clothes, a roof over their head, can send their children to school, can access health care. That is the absolute minimum in a civilized society. When we are in government, we firmly believe that we must carry the states in any national program, national scheme. Obviously, we'll invite all the states to join in this effort, and I believe no state will say no. No state will say that the poorest of India should not be brought up to a level of income where poverty is practically wiped out. We are doing this as part of our firm belief that the poorest in the country, the poor in this country, have the first right to the resources of this country.
The idea which has been borrowed, and Mr. Gandhi has spoken about it, one thing which I must clarify what they were saying, and that the universe, whenever has been spoken about the universal basic income, and the universe in there was the poorer section of the society, the marginalized. And what they are talking about, same thing. So basically, they are just trying to copycat something with an idea which they feel that can be latched by people.
Well, reactions coming in there to Rahul Gandhi's promise of a minimum income guarantee if voted to power. Praveen Chakravarti, the chairperson of the Data Analytics Department of the Congress Party, joins us now. Praveen, thanks very much for joining us. I was just in conversation with the former Finance Minister, Mr. Chidambaram. He clarified that the rationale for this is to target this minimum income guarantee to the poorest of poor households, families, not individuals. He was also clear that this will not cost as much as what was the estimate given by the former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramaniam, because this is only an adaptation of his idea of universal basic income, and hence the promise of fiscal prudence is something that Mr. Chidambaram held out if they were voted to power. But given the experience that we've had with schemes and targeting of schemes previously and the concerns that have been raised with an idea like this one, what would you keep in mind as you know, probably the government looks at rolling something like this out as well, which is the speculation?
Yeah, I mean, speculation aside, I think you're right when we talk about this as an adaptation of universal basic income. And what is the adaptation? Universal basic income meant it was for everybody and it was the same amount for everybody. We've said we're going to adapt it to make it targeted at the poorest, and it will also be progressive in nature. So the entire idea is to ensure that there is a certain minimum income for every household in the country. It's actually, in a conceptual sense, it's not very different from, say, you can think of it as a no Indian left behind, similar to the No Child Left Behind Act of President Obama in education. So the idea is that this will be progressive in nature and to ensure that there is a minimum income for every household. Now, I think your specific question is about targeting. How would we target? Can we target efficiently? I'm sure you would agree with me that today we can target households much better than we could even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So that's number one. Number two, it is possible, and Dr. Arvind Subramanian, the former chief economic advisor, has himself coincidentally written a piece today in the Business Standard where he's actually laid out a framework for how it is possible to target using the socio-economic census data. So it is entirely possible to target today, and I admit it is, previously it was perhaps wasn't as efficient to be able to target, but we can target this.
Right.
So the entire idea is that this should benefit the poorest households, and it will be progressive in nature.
Okay, if you can explain what you mean by it will be progressive in nature. I go back again, and that was the point that you raised, the former CA also talking about it. It's linked to the 2011 census. So the census went by 5,000 rupees per household as the definition of poor. So when you talk about this being a progressive income guarantee scheme, can you explain what you mean?
Sure. So let's assume that there is a certain minimum income that we all agree upon, which is the minimum income threshold for any living for any Indian in this country, right? And that could be whatever amount. That would of course be dependent on what the living conditions are, what our per capita income is, what is inflation, all of those things. But once we arrive at that, then we have to look at how far from that gap, from that minimum income, are households. If a household is 50% of that, then they need the 50% gap to be as a minimum income support. If a household is 70% of that, then they only need the 30% gap. So the idea is, then that's what I mean by progressive. So the idea is to ensure that everyone does have a certain basic minimum.
Okay, so that's important. It won't be one uniform stipend as was envisaged by the former chief economic advisor. I also want to ask you for further clarifications, Praveen. The former CA had spoken about a universal basic income, but only if we were to do away with some of the existing subsidies. I asked Mr. Chidambaram this question as well, but he didn't give me a straightforward answer. Do you believe that this will require a redrawing of the current subsidies?
See, I think we have to think about it in a much more nuanced manner. I think your larger question is, how would we fund this? Let's think about it in terms of how would we fund it. And we are very clear, we are going to be fiscally prudent as well, right? Fiscal prudence is something that's very important, which means we have to look for new revenue streams. We have to rationalize expenditure. And do not forget, income schemes do provide an immediate consumption boost to the economy and the GDP. So there could be immediate benefits that accrue. So I think we have to look at all of this in the context of transitioning to the scheme as well. It is not simply about, okay, we're dropping one scheme and we're introducing this. And also it's important to look at schemes which are, what are existing income schemes and what are existing in-kind schemes. For example, PDS is an in-kind scheme. Narega is an income scheme. So we have to be very careful, and we have to think through all of this. All I can tell you is there is a lot of thought that we've put behind. We are working out all the details which will be revealed in the manifesto. And I'm sure you would agree that with Mr. Chidambaram as the chairman of the manifesto committee, we couldn't have had a better mind and a person to go through the details of how we would fund this.
You know, I understand that you cannot give us too many details, but I go back again to the point that you just raised, that, you know, in the context of what you do with existing subsidies, you'll have to look at the income-based subsidies, you'll have to look at the in-kind-based subsidies. But just in terms of the rough calculation, the broad estimation, on the basis of what you've arrived at this decision, I mean, for Arvind Subramaniam, if it was 3 to 5% of GDP for a universal basic income, what would this adaptation cost?
No. See, I think if you look at Arvind Subramaniam's piece today, he actually talks about anywhere between 0.5% to 2%, and he settles at about 1.5% of GDP. I'm not for a moment suggesting that would be our framework as well, but I'm saying it's not the 3 or 4%. We are very, very conscious of our fiscal, to be fiscally prudent. See, there are also macroeconomic opportunities that arise. I don't think, with oil prices being where they are, I don't think there could be a better time than to indulge in something like this. So there are various factors at play, and I do not for a moment believe that this would be in the range of 3 to 4% of GDP, as you suggest.
Okay, that was the estimation given by Subramaniam in the economic survey, and I go back to what he said. It would cost between 4 to 5% of GDP, assuming a reduction of poverty to 0.5%. But then again, that was a universal basic income, and what the Congress is talking about is not a UBI. Very quickly, I'll end by asking you, Praveen, if you come to power, if you are voted to power, what do you see as the big execution challenges of being able to pull this through?
First, I don't like the term coming to power. I think we will be, if we are in government, with the mandate to implement this. I do think, you know, some of the things that, I mean, the challenges in execution, we will have to think through this. See, we have to think through the transition. I consistently maintain that what we've experienced, you know, over the past 4 or 5 years economically through GST, and of course, certainly not to talk about demonetization, the transition to any big policy change is equally important as the policy itself. And I think we're going to be extremely cognizant of that, and we will be guarded in our transition. But this is absolutely something that we believe, because in our economic resolution also we highlighted widening income inequality as a huge social problem in the country, and we are convinced that this is the way to actually reduce and address that problem.
Praveen Chakravarti, always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18, the head of Congress's data analytics cell, taking us through the rationale behind the promise being made by Congress President Rahul Gandhi. Well, interim Finance Minister Piyush Goyal has met with the country's top PSU bankers just 4 days ahead of the budget. Speaking after the meeting, Goyal said various measures to support the small and medium enterprises were discussed. He's assured support from the centre to state-run banks. Take a look.
I would only like to thank all the participants of the meeting for their proactive approach, for their involvement, and the commitment that they have shown towards the people of India, towards businesses, towards our small traders, towards our MSME manufacturing sector. And truly, after today's meeting, where they also expressed the confidence that after the government has amended the PCA Act, the Prevention of Corruption Act, giving them the confidence that while anybody indulging in misfeasance or bad practices will not be spared, but genuine commercial decisions taken by bankers will also be protected.
If there are any issues which the public sector banks are concerned, we have been raising these issues with the Reserve Bank of India from time to time. The governor was very receptive to whatever the bankers have submitted. And similarly, how do we tone up the administration at most of the banks in the various fields, which includes credit delivery, which includes financial inclusion, which includes stressed asset management. So the whole day, these were very wide-ranging discussions. But ultimately, Honorable Minister has already once again confirmed, this has been confirmed several times, that the government is standing fully behind the public sector banks, and now whatever the concerns or issues bankers had, government is addressing them proactively. Therefore, the onus shifts on the bank managements to deliver.
ICICI Bank tanked in trade as a fresh row has erupted over the transfer of Sudhanshu Mishra, the investigating officer in the Videocon loan case. Sources say the CBI transferred the officer for keeping the case file pending and leaking information regarding searches. Parikshit Luthra, who was the first to break the story, joins us now with the details. Parikshit, curious developments continue in this matter.
That's right. And the case of Sudhanshu Mishra, the supervising officer in this case, is really strange. He signed on this FIR on the 22nd of January. The very next day, he was shunted out on grounds of leaking information about the searches that were being carried out and also about keeping the case file pending for a very long time and not converting the preliminary inquiry into FIR. This FIR has now been criticized by a lot of people, but the fact that this investigating officer signed on the file, later was removed on the suspicion of leaking information, makes the case rather curious. We've been asking our sources what has happened so far. Have any of the accused, Chanda Kochar, Deepak Kochar or Venugopal Dhoot, been summoned so far? They replied in the negative, saying that all the documents that were recovered during searches are being scrutinized right now. Back to you.
All right, thanks very much, Parikshit. We're now joined by N.R. Vasan, the former Special Director at the CBI. Mr. Vasan, thanks very much. What do you make of these developments? Here is an officer who signs off on an FIR and the very next day is moved out allegedly for leaking information, for sitting on the file. I mean, this speaks poorly, doesn't it?
You see, let me put the entire incident in right perspective. In CBI, such kind of FIRs are registered only with the specific approval of the director. That means it was the director. It might have been signed by the SP of the branch, that technically, but the FIR draft must have been approved in toto by the director CBI and by none else. Second, if there are accusations that this officer has leaked information before the searches were conducted, yes, then he is liable to be proceeded against, and the organization should be taking whatever action is necessary. Third, as regards the file was pending with him for a long time, the entire chain of command in CBI is responsible up to the director. Now, this is such a high-profile case, and if I understand, I am out of India, but if I understand correctly, the PE was registered somewhere in December 2017. I don't know why it has taken them more than a year to convert into FIR and then name some persons based on no specific information. It's very, very surprising. I think it is a total professional failure of CBI in handling the matter, and the officers who have done this were responsible must be proceeded against.
Okay. What is this now? Where does this leave the credibility of the CBI? Here is the current finance minister hitting out at the CBI for calling what they've done with this FIR investigative adventurism. You've already seen the battle between the former CBI director and his number two. And now you have, this matter sort of turning curiouser and curious every day. What is the sanctity then of the FIRs or the Ps that the CBI is filing? I mean, the opposition claims that most of this is politically motivated. Does this not lend credence then to that argument?
You see, that is all talking politics. I think I am not at all impressed by these statements of politicians, either of this color or that color. You see, it's a total professional failure of CBI leadership. And whatever we are watching today is very, very unfortunate. The CBI has lost its credibility, and it is going to take a long time to get back that credibility and respect and trust in the public. And this FIR, if I understand correctly, they have added a para where they have named some officers who earlier worked in ICICI Bank, a kind of making a roving and fishing inquiry. 1 year, if they could not find anything specific against these individuals, so where was the need to put their name? if during the investigation, any role of these persons would have come out, they could have registered a fresh case or added those names at that particular time. Here, what they have done is they have mentioned something against some people, not even named them as suspects in the FIR. It's very strange. It doesn't happen in CBI.
Yeah.
It's not done. It's not done, and it sends wrong signals both for the financial sector, because earlier also there has been criticism of CBI that they make fishing and roving inquiries. And second, as a CBI, we must act responsibly. We must take action against the corrupt. We must take action against people who have committed crime, no doubt. But we should not name people without anything substantive with us till we are very, very definite that those people need to be proceeded against.
Okay, so deep disappointment there with the manner in which the CBI has dealt with this case. That's the former special director of the CBI saying that the agency should not indulge in a roving and fishing expedition, pretty much mirroring what we've heard from Arun Jaitley as well, but saying that the buck stops with the director, and the director should have been in the know for while a file was pending, why it wasn't being taken forward, and even as far as this FIR is concerned, the direction to go ahead with that would have been at the behest of the director. So the chain of command has seen a virtual collapse. That's the view there from the former special director at the CBI. Completely out of time. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of What's Hot. Thanks very much for watching. Markets hit their lowest level in 2019. Both the Sensex and the Nifty lost 1% after a broad-based decline. Markets today talk back takes the action forward.